Why is the word God so triggering? Hi, I'm Anne-Margaret with this week's Sacred Sunday message to raise the vibration of your body, mind, and spirit. So I was a little nervous prepping for this talk today and thinking about it because this is a very, very highly charged topic. It's this little three-lettered word, this teeny, teeny, tiny word has been the source of so much pain, divisiveness, and yet such the source also of so much beauty, healing, miracles, and love. So today we're going to cover a few different things. We're going to have fun with a little Shakespeare and identity pronouns, and then also get into really what all of this has to do with freedom and empowerment. Okay, so thanks for joining me. What is going on with our relationship to this? I know I was actually inspired to do this talk because I was leading a meditation, and in my meditations, I'll use God, I'll use universe, I'll use love. Uh, I try and keep it inclusive and not of a religious tone, but more of a spiritual way for people, whatever your background or faith is, to connect to without those triggers. And at the same time, somebody brought this to my attention. I'm so grateful she did because she said, the women's circle that she was leading, and I have a women's circle I started in 2003, and they kind of sprinkled all over the place. But there is a meditation that I let our women's leaders use if they want to do that. And so she said, some of the girls were a little triggered by the word God. You usually use like universal, blah, 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 love, whatever. And you said God. And I look back and I listened to it and I thought, wow, that's so interesting because obviously I know I haven't been living under a rock. I know that this is a triggering word. And I also know through my own interfaith seminary exploration, I went to interfaith seminary for 2 years with Anthony, the first 2 years of our marriage, studying all the world religions, learning how to be a force for bridging gaps, common denomination between people of different faiths, cultures, and backgrounds. And so I know quite in my own family, in my own reality, in just my observation of the world, that this can be super divisive. But how do we heal the triggers within ourselves so that we're not so set off by other people? That's what this really has to do about freedom. So how also the other question I want to ask you guys today was also how might this be interfering with our direct connection to this energy, whatever name you give it, whether it be this sacred masculine or divine feminine or mother father creator god or love. How might our resistance to an identity around it that someone or something has or uses might be interfering with our connection to them and how they see the world? So it's very, very valuable. Thank you so much for just joining me today, because my intention with this talk is to create more of a compassionate understanding for people who struggle with this and also get triggered. So I want to ask you a question here. So are you, when you're thinking about God or you're relating to God, are you either focusing on what's bringing you together or what's dividing you? That's a good question for us all to ask, because in America alone, just in America alone, I think we have something like 43,000 sects of Christianity. 43,000 sects, different groups, different tribes that relate to God, even under the Christian God, the Judeo-Christian God, and they have 43,000 separations. Okay, and it's really pretty profound right now because in January everything was aligning sort of in the planetary alignments. That was the same alignment when Martin Luther broke away from the Catholic Church. And so we have a lot of this energy right now coming to the surface of how do we identify, and people talking about the third dimension into the fifth dimension. And I relate to everything through a lot of chakra work. So third chakra is very much about identity, about ego, about separateness, not in a bad way, because we're having a separate experience, right? So in that third chakra, it's really about our integration of our soul into this separate form, our purpose. But we can have traps too. We can just focus on what divides us. And there's such a trend right now saying, you have to use the right pronoun with me. You have to use the right label with me. And it can be a very slippery slope, although very well intended. be a very slippery slope where we are losing our freedom and setting ourselves up to be very enabled by others and our weakness, and also very much enabling our own smallness, because we are so much more than the sex that we identify with or the religious title that we identify with. We're so much greater. So if we have not taken accountability for those labels in our lives, then we have a real challenge with how to be free of them. So how do we learn labels? Like, how did you learn what God is in your life? It probably came through somebody else, some another human. It didn't, or you might have had some very direct connection to that energy. But when we learn about labels, like, okay, this is the color purple, this is a necklace, like when we focus on our identifying, we do this as children so we can integrate in this reality, so that we can domesticate and understand how to communicate with one another in the best way and agree upon things. But the word God, if we are taught that God is one thing and not another, then we begin to see the divisiveness of this word. And we leave ourselves open when we are over identifying with these labels. And if people don't treat us or call us or do things in a certain way, then we leave ourselves open to suffering. Because let's face it, and the Buddhist said it best, anything we are resistant to is the cause of all suffering. And I want to bring up The Mastery of Love. If you haven't read this book by Don Miguel Ruiz, it came across my I guess about 20 years ago, and I read it cover to cover, I think 3 times without stopping. Like, it was such a profound book. And I remember in this book, he has a very crucial teaching about how we walk around, and we're seeing this more so than ever, and the labels of the political labels and the labels of our pronouns, saying that if we are not healing our own self and our own triggers, we're setting ourselves up to be triggered left and right by anyone and anything. And we're creating like this very delicate existence rather than feeling empowered and free just to be ourselves. And he talks about it in this way. He said it's almost like we're walking around with a bunch of wounds, like open sores. And if somebody comes up and says, "Oh, hello," and puts their hand on our, we go, "Oh, stop. You don't touch me there. Like, don't go there with me. That hurts. And I need you to be responsible for not going there with me." Rather than putting the salve on our own wounds, we are setting ourselves up and creating more of a world where we are expecting other people to relate to us in a specific way. And if they don't, we are suffering, we are upset, we are insulted, and we're so easily manipulated when we are easily insulted. So to heal those own wounds is so, so critical. And when I think back to my time at Interfaith Seminary, the usage of the word God is not just religious, right? We can use this in a very universal term. And even with atheists know that this concept of God exists. They don't necessarily relate to it being as a factual thing in the world, but they know that this concept exists, that people believe in it, they talk about it. So it's not something that is not actually there. It is a concept, and it can be quite more for people, obviously, in the way that you relate to it. So with with not acknowledging how we're interpreting this word, let's just use the word God. It's a 3-letter word. Let's start with another 3-letter word, and then we can kind of see the metaphor that I'm trying to get at. So if we don't take responsibility and accountability for how we're relating to something, like be it our identity, our pronouns, be it our political or identity, or anything that we really relate to with our third chakra, our ego, we can get into a lot of trouble if we don't take ownership for that. So let's talk about just a very funny sort of other 3-letter word. The other 3-letter word is sun. Okay, if we relate to the sun, now the sun seems to be much less triggering than God, but what are some negative things that we relate to? And we're really looking at association here being the trigger. So if we wanted to look at the sun like it was a negative thing, what could we look at? Global warming, sunburn, humidity, like when dehydration, or in the desert, being lost in the desert, dying from sun exposure. Or I think of also like when I'm driving and the sun is in my eyes, like almost it can cause accidents, scorched earth or scorched, you know, plants and crops. Okay, so we can relate to something, the sun, that helps to grow everything around us, that warms our earth, that makes us feel so good, that causes us to have even a better sense of health through our vitamin D intake. We can look at it in a very negative way. So let's take the other three-letter word, God. There's a reason why we have such a negative association sometimes and are triggered by this, or triggered by it when other people call it a different name. God in history has been used to divide, for hierarchy, excuse for terrorism acts. We think about started in 12th century, a few hundred years, the Inquisition, where people were massively killed if they did not confess to their heresy. It's been used to kill. We think about sexual abuse and abuse of power with relationship to God, and also religious shaming too is another one too. So there are a lot of things that we associate that if we don't heal that within ourselves, and somebody talks about God or uses it in some way or whatever, it's same thing with the sun example, we're going to be triggered by it rather than connect with all of the goodness that it is. So I hate the saying, like, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, but we can understand what that means is that, whatever is not of the light, whatever is not of your empowered relationship to that thing, let it go, let it be. And also recognize that this very powerful concept or relationship to this all supreme, creating, loving oneness that exists, that we are all pulling into and tapping into in different ways, it should not be forfeited. We get really in trouble. And so let's talk about, like, I promised you a little Shakespeare, right? So let's talk about, like, what's in a name, all right? I know you guys probably know the balcony scene from Romeo and Juliet. I love, 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 love Shakespeare, okay? So I put a couple notes to references about, like, oils to connect with that divine source of all things, and then also some references to the books for today. But words have power, especially Shakespeare. Shakespeare is so, so powerful. And we learn those words from humans. So I bring up Romeo and Juliet because, the beautiful quote from Romeo and Juliet is, what's in a name, a word for, or word, wait, hold on. Let me find it real quick here. Yeah, what's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other word would smell as sweet. She's talking about Romeo being her arch rival. And we can look at things like this too in our Democratic, Republican, or religious divisiveness, that Romeo comes from a different family, a different identity. Juliet comes from the opposite. They're warring. And she's trying to make sense of the love that she feels in her heart towards Romeo, and he's saying, hey, call me love. I'll be baptized anew. Just call me love. Call me whatever you want. Don't call me, Montague. Like, I can defy my name. I can just be in relationship with you. Can we have the courage to be so committed to love, you guys, to be so committed to oneness and to connecting with others, that we are willing to give up our identifying labels, that we are willing to give up and surrender our divisiveness so that we can further commit to finding a oneness. And when we think about God, we also, if we do not heal this, third and seventh chakra relationship, this identity, this seeing place, this oneness, this connection to all things, whether it be Akashic records of, like, everything that's ever been said and all the wisdom in the world, or just that connection directly to God, then we're going to fail to really see that God energy in ourselves, and that will limit our potential. And if we fail to see that God in others, that Namaste teaching, it will limit them for you. And that will limit you. So it's limiting your freedom. It's limiting that wisdom. And failure to see God in everything limits your perspective and traps you in polarity, right, wrong, good, bad, holy, evil, rather than going, wow, if all is unfolding divinely, if God is in everything, how can I make more sense of how this is all unfolding? And it gives you a different perspective. And failure to be open to that God energy, whatever you call it, failure to be open limits your wisdom, limits that ability to connect with that oneness and that ever-sourcing truth. All right, you guys, I love you so much. If you need extra coaching, reach out to me, or couples counseling. hang in there and keep raising the vibration. All right, everybody, be well, and I will see you very soon.